Good afternoon, everybody. This is Darius Assemi, publisher of GB Wire and president of Granville Homes. Welcome again to another episode of GB Wire live on Facebook. Today I have with me Neal Browning, one of the first volunteers for the Moderna's COVID vaccine testing. Welcome, Neal, to our program.
Thank you.
And those of you that subscribe to gbwire.com have read Jim Jacobs' articles and interviews with Neal, which has been done over the last few weeks. Some great in-depth analysis of the vaccine, of Moderna, and on Neal and why he's doing this. So again, welcome, Neal. Neal, a resident of Seattle, Washington, joining us today live on Zoom. And without delay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Neal. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're doing this, and what stage of the clinical trials you are with Moderna, and when can the public at large expect to see a vaccine, a successful vaccine, and when do you think it's going to be phased out? I'm sorry, phased in. When will the vaccine be phased in and COVID to be phased out?
Right.
So I'm going to turn it over to you, Neal.
Thanks, Darius. So I've lived in the Seattle area for about 26 years, originally from the southeastern United States. And my mother's a registered nurse. My fiance is a registered nurse. So I've grown up around medical backgrounds in medicine my whole life. When I was growing up, there was never an option for if I would get my flu shots or vaccines. It was always when. So taking that in mind and being in the tech field myself, I'm very interested in data, science, and facts. So when I was having a discussion and COVID-19 was first starting to erupt here on the shores of the United States, ironically, the first case was in Washington, very close to where I live. I went ahead and was having some discussions on Facebook with friends about this and how it seems to be moving through without a lot of notice for the first week or so, and then people will suddenly feel sick, but in that time they've been spreading it. So my buddy reached out to me on text, who was part of this Facebook chat, and said, "Hey, I know that there's a trial going on through Kaiser Permanente up here for a vaccine. Is that something that would interest you? You seem really passionate about this." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Forward me the information." So in late February, early March, he sent me the email address for Kaiser's intake system for the vaccine trial. And I sent them my name and phone number and said, give me a call if you're interested. And within about 48 to 72 hours, I got a phone call back. They went through what the age group limitations were, and then stressed that it be people who are very healthy for this phase 1 trial that I'm in. So I went through and had to do a physical, drug test, numerous blood draws, so they could make sure that I looked healthy and everything came back clean. So they gave me a whole bunch of paperwork to review on what the trial would involve, the amount of time commitment for it, where the appointments would take place, and restrictions. After reviewing that and discussing it with my fiance, we felt like the risk was minimal compared to the benefits that this could reap for the rest of the world. So on March 16th, I became the second person in the world to have an experimental coronavirus vaccine injected into my body that had never been tested on animals before.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. So. We know that Moderna came out with first results over a week ago. Kind of tell us about which stage it is, which stage you're in, how many people were in the first group, and how many people are going into the second group, and kind of maybe take us through what are the next processes we can expect from Moderna before we can get to a vaccine.
Sure. So there was an original group of 45 people. They were broken into 3 groups. The first group would get a low dose, 25 micrograms. And then after 2 weeks of monitoring to make sure that the group I was in, which was the low dose, was stable and safe, they moved to injecting 4 times that at 100 micrograms to a medium dose group. That group would then pause for 2 weeks to make sure that they looked healthy and had no adverse reactions. And they went to a 10 times my dose at 250 micrograms for a large group of 15 people. Since we were staggered 2 weeks apart, we did a first dose in each group the very first time around. After a week, they would draw our blood and make sure that we were healthy and everything looked good. At 2 weeks after the first injection, we would get an immune blood draw, which is sent off to Moderna for analysis on whether antibodies are being formed, whether the reaction was what was desired, and did things look like they were still tracking well. At 4 weeks after the first injection, each of the groups would then get a second dose identical to the first of the vaccine as a booster. And it would follow the same protocol with blood draw at 1 week just to make sure we were healthy, a blood draw 2 weeks after that second injection to make sure immune response happened. So a week ago, this past Monday, Moderna released some data on the first 4 people in the small dose and the first 4 in the medium dose who had had blood drawn after their second vaccination, I being one of those 8 people. The results were really good. All 8 of the 8 people had produced antibodies that were the neutralizing type that fit over the protein spikes that you've seen before depicted on graphics of the virus cell. And that's what protects the person from actually getting infected, as well as helps coat the virus cell so that white blood cells can take over and absorb and destroy it. They didn't have enough blood at that point in time from people who were behind my group in the protocol to be able to do that kind of deep dive into the amount of antibodies produced for everyone. Everybody at that point had at least 1 dose of the vaccine, and they were able to confirm that all 45 people had produced antibodies, but only the best results were from those who had had 2 shots.
Got it. Tell us a little bit about how this vaccine can work. We all see these triangles or these spikes or coronas on the or spikes on the outside of this coronavirus. Tell us, we've heard about the RNA version. Kind of maybe guide us through how this vaccine could work.
So this is something new that hasn't really been anything that's made it to market yet. This is not using a weakened or a dead version of the actual virus or a lab-created version of the virus. So I cannot contract COVID-19. I cannot get sick from this injection. The way that most viruses work is through basically hijacking your cell and using its DNA to make new viruses. This is working in a similar fashion where it uses messenger RNA created in a lab that doesn't hijack my cell and take it over to make viruses. It just hijacks a few of my cells and says, make those little spike triangles on the outside of the cell so that you look like you're a COVID-19 virus cell. At that point, my body would react and see that those were looking like foreign invaders, even though they're my cells, and they shouldn't be there, and invoke an immune response, which is what obviously happened successfully. And my body was able to produce the antibodies that can help neutralize that.
Got it. And so this is called the RNA version of a vaccine. Is that correct?
Yes, it uses messenger RNA.
Got it.
Your official name for it is mRNA 1273.
Got it. Thank you. So tell us about this. So Moderna is still in phase 1 of these clinical trials. Tell us what the second phase is going to look like. How many folks are going to be in it, and then what happens beyond that?
Sure. So around mid-May, I believe, they were authorized by the FDA to begin phase 2. They have not yet, that I've heard, but some people who were interested in it, and I gave the email address for Kaiser, had gotten kickback emails saying they weren't taking any more people. So I believe they probably have filled up phase 2. Phase 2 is supposed to be 600 people total. Unlike phase 1, some of these people will actually be getting a placebo to just see if there's any reaction to injection and if they think something happened or if something really did happen. They also have changed the dosing, getting rid of the very large dose and getting rid of the small dose that I had, by moving to a 50 and 100 microgram dosing for the second phase. They've also said that phase 3 is supposed to be starting in July, so they're moving this far more rapidly than any vaccination has ever done before.
Got it. And phase 3 will be how many folks in phase 3? And what parts of the country are folks participating in these phases?
So phase one typically is centered around just making sure that it's safe for human use, with some emphasis on dosing sizes and some emphasis on does it actually work well. Phase two is locking in the dosing sizes to make sure that they know exactly what works the best and tracking a lot of the immune response. It'll also intake people of a much wider variety of health conditions, because obviously the people who are the most at risk, the very old and those with lung issues, since that's what COVID-19 tends to attack, are going to be important people to have in there, so we can make sure that the vaccine doesn't actually harm those people that we're trying to protect from the virus. Phase three is probably going to be in the 5-figure numbers, if not 10,000 and more than that. You want to do as broad a net as possible to catch as many different people of different ethnicities, different ages, different underlying health conditions, to make sure that it's safe for as many people as possible. And some people are usually selected in phase three to do what's called a challenge test, which is where they are actually exposed to the live virus after being inoculated to validate that it does indeed work.
Got it. And in the first first clinical trials, if anybody tests positive for COVID, then what happens? What happened then?
So the guidance we were given was basically just to follow whatever our local, state, and federal guidelines were: shelter in place, wear face masks, socially distant. We weren't supposed to lock ourselves down, but at the same time, we also were not supposed to travel anywhere we knew there was a large concentration of an outbreak. They said that if any of the patients got infected, it could jeopardize our place in the trial, and that if any of the workers at the test site were to be infected, then it would basically close the entire research project down, because everyone that had been exposed to anybody that tested positive would have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And with doing the consistent blood draws and doing multiple doses of the vaccine, that would destroy the work and the timeline.
Got it. Do you have any idea of when Moderna believes they could, if all goes well, so all these different sample sizes across the country, getting to the 10,000 or tens of thousands by July, which sounds like really accelerated. When does Moderna believe, if all those go well and the results get published and FDA approves those steps, when does Moderna believe that there'll be a vaccine available for public consumption?
What they've said so far is that they're targeting for fall for the first regular people not involved in the trial to get vaccinations, and that those will focus exclusively on those who are exposed to the highest levels of the virus: your frontline doctors, nurses, emergency room staff, first responders, paramedics, EMTs, and that kind of thing.
Got it. So sometime in the fall for the frontline workers, hopefully there's a vaccine out. And when should the rest of us and the country and eventually the world expect something from Moderna?
I would hope, I don't know for sure, but I would hope that it would be in the early parts of 2021. I know that Moderna signed a contract with Lonza, which is a large pharmaceutical company in Switzerland. And Lonza has said that they will be able to ramp up to produce 1 billion vaccines a year. Obviously, that's not even close to enough to vaccinate the entire world. So other companies are going to have to step up and help also find parallel cures or do some kind of a vaccine trial that's successful as well.
There is close to 100 different companies working on a vaccine. The company or the University of Oxford in England, it looks like they're going into phase 2. Has Moderna made any comments about their vaccine or what their process looks like?
No, Moderna hasn't. And just to be clear, I don't have any affiliation with Moderna and haven't spoken with anybody from Moderna. I'm just doing my own research. But I was actually on a segment on the BBC with one of the people who a day or two after the interview I did was going to be one of the first recipients of that Oxford test. I do know that it's using adenovirus, which is something that the FDA and the CDC does not allow in this country. It's not deemed safe enough. The only people in the United States that are exposed to adenovirus vaccines are military personnel.
Got it. So if all goes well, frontline workers could have a vaccine sometime in the fall, and not being inside Moderna. But your guess is early next year, the public at large could be, at least in the United States, could have a vaccine to inject.
That's certainly the hope. Yes.
Okay, got it. Is there any conversation amongst your group on how to reduce the contagiousness of COVID? There's several articles out there that says if we just washed our hands 10 times a day, and if 80% of us wore a face mask, the contagious rate goes down to 1 or even below 1, and in a matter of a month or two, the virus will be dead. Any comments from your group?
Yeah, we are all believers in making sure we stay socially distant, not hanging out with the neighbors that we hung out with 3 or 4 months ago. You go to the store or the gas station or wherever you need to go to at off-peak times to limit the amount of people you're exposed to. Wear a face mask when you're out in public and close to anybody. Wash your hands a lot. The idea is, if you treat yourself like you're infected and not trying to infect other people, that's the best stance to take. A lot of people resistant to wearing masks, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, were resistant to wearing seatbelts in cars. Now it's a law and we don't really think about it. The same thing for no shirt, no shoes, no service in a restaurant. Nobody bats an eye, but if somebody says wear a mask, people feel like they're being infringed upon. The purpose behind a mask is not to protect you. The purpose behind the mask is to protect everyone else you see. The mask is not tight-fitting enough and filtering nearly down to the particular level enough to protect you from inhaling something. It's to keep what you're exhaling from getting around to all these other people. And that's the important part, because you don't know you could be sick. This thing sleeps for 7, 10, sometimes 14 days before you actually feel sick. And during that time frame, you're spreading it unknowingly to everyone you meet.
That's a great point. Is Seattle or Greater Washington State are restaurants open back up in Seattle?
No. So we're just having some outlying counties that have very, very low numbers move to phase 2 out of 4 that's opening our state. We are in phase 1, where we're still staying safe at home. The very minimal bare things that are the least likely to expose you are what's allowed right now, which is some parks are open. You can do jogging, bicycling, golfing, fishing, but those are only done singly or at least 6 feet apart.
Got it. If restaurants were open, would you go to a restaurant in your neighborhood?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I think I would probably be hesitant, and if I did, it would definitely be at off-peak hours. The next phase that will have restaurants open in my state is opening at 50% what the normal capacity would be, with no more than 5 people sitting at a table, and those people need to be basically housemates or relatives that have been quarantining with each other and sheltering in place with each other this whole time.
Got it. Has Moderna asked or placed any restrictions on your activities or lifestyle?
No, but Kaiser Permanente, during the waivers that I had to sign, said that females cannot become pregnant, males cannot impregnate. I can't donate blood or plasma. I can't do any drugs except for alcohol and cannabis. I cannot travel outside of the 50 US states. And I need to restrict my travel to focus away from any area that would be a high concentration of COVID-19 cases.
Which is, what would that be? I mean, in the Seattle area?
Unfortunately, so I live 5 miles from where the first cluster outbreak was in Kirkland at the nursing homes. So that had just happened when I was going in to sign all the paperwork. And so they said, basically, according to this, you shouldn't even be at home. But obviously, we realized that there's not a way to track where it is. So just be as smart as possible. I mean, if they're a situation like New York City, obviously they wouldn't want me to travel there, because that at the time ended up being a much worse place than Washington State.
No, exactly. Any other closing comments for us, for those of us in beautiful Fresno, California, or in the heart of Central California, where most of the produce of the world or of the nation originates from, about 200-mile radius of where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah, we get a lot of good food from California, and we appreciate it. I know that it's hard. I know we all have cabin fever. We all miss going to cookouts with our friends, especially now that the weather is getting so nice. We miss being able to go to a winery and do a wine taste, go to the brew pub and hang out with our friends. But the reason behind keeping it like this and doing a slow open is so that we don't have a massive second wave like what happened in Denver, Colorado in 1918 after the Spanish flu hit there. Basically, everybody tossed their masks off. The cases were down really low, and it came back with a vengeance and was worse the second time.
Yeah, that's the fear, isn't it? That we'll get a second wave in the fall. There's a graph I was looking at a couple of days ago that showed, at least in Central California, the contagiousness rate is going to drop all the way through August, September, and then it's going to slowly rise and spike potentially November, December, January, into early next year. And are all concerned about, we are concerned today, but a lot of us are concerned about what will the second wave look like. And of course, we are in control of what the second wave could look like. Our behavior as Americans, as residents of this country, will and our communities will determine, what the second wave looks like in each county, in each state, and each city.
Absolutely, and you bring up a really good point. A lot of people will point to the original estimations of the death toll and say we're nowhere near that. We overreacted. It's because of how we reacted and did it so well that we aren't at those numbers. Those numbers were basically, this is the worst case, this is if we do nothing. So we've greatly lowered the impact to our country by doing what we did and as quickly as we did. You only have to look at Italy and Spain to see how a lack of reacting quick enough can have a serious impact on the death toll.
No, you're exactly right. No, it's easy. I share this with a lot of my friends. It's easy to forget, and it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. We
Right.
have to roll the clock back to late March, when the panic was occurring in Italy, and people were being turned away from hospitals because they just had no capacity, no rooms, no beds, not even hallway space. And we forget the panic that this entire world was under the spell of COVID. And as we're learning more about this virus and how it reacts and how contagious it is and what the ramifications are, we're becoming more confident on how to attack it. And because of people like you and Moderna, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it's not a train. It's a great opportunity for us to beat the crap out of COVID for once and for all, hopefully. But yeah, we forget sometimes the situation we were in several weeks ago, as early as 5, 8, 10 weeks ago, and all the damage we did to this world, really, to our country financially, was as a big price to pay. I mean, from our company, our valley across the nation, a lot of companies, especially hospitality industry, has suffered incredibly. I mean, if you're a restaurant operator and you had to shut down, I mean, the pain is incredible. And the reports are upwards of 30% of restaurants may not open back up. But unfortunately, we had to go through that exercise so that we don't get the massive death spikes and loss of life. We can bring the economy back. We cannot bring the dead back. So it was lots, strict measures, but we're benefiting from that today. It's easy to back and go, we overreacted, but I completely agree with you. We had to take a lot of those measures. I mean, our company, our home building company, has suffered substantially in the first 4 to 6 weeks. although things have turned around substantially over the last 2 weeks, which is really good news for us as a company. Uh, I want to, on behalf of all of us in Central California, I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for volunteering to in the clinical trials, going through this exercise. I want to say putting your life at risk and for the rest of us in this country and in this world. Again, we're very grateful to you. If you ever your travels ever take you to California, you always have a place in Fresno, California to stay. We'll take care of all the hospitality. You can drink some of the best wines in the world, better than Washington State wines. Uh, and some of the most fantastic microbrews as well. Any final thoughts, Neal, before we wrap up today?
I'm glad to be able to help out because this wasn't given to animals before it went to humans. We were both the first human and animal trial. So there was definitely unknowns and risks involved. I'm glad to be able to do it. And like you say, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but let's not overthink this and rush out to undo a lot of the good stuff that we've done in a mad rush to get back to normal. Let's take our time, do it slowly, do it right so that we can keep things moving in the right direction.
Awesome, Neal. Thank you so much. I hope to have you back on our show in a few weeks after the next batch of results come out in early June.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you again from all of us in this world and in our country, in our nation, for doing this, volunteering this. Grateful to have people like you and looking forward to seeing you over Zoom in the next couple of weeks and hopefully in person one day.
One day. That'd be great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Alrighty.
And to all of our audience out there, on behalf of all of us at GB Wire, thank you for watching this episode. We hope to have Neal back on with the next set of data, hopefully in a few weeks. And until then, have a great day. It's a little bit warm here today in Fresno, but stay cool and talk to you soon.